There is a silence that lives beneath every cry, every tear, every frustration of the human heart. It whispers one haunting question: why must we suffer? From birth to death, suffering seems to follow us like a shadow. It hides behind our relationships, our ambitions, even our moments of joy. The Buddha called it dukkha, the great dissatisfaction that haunts every human life. But what if suffering is not a punishment, nor a flaw in existence, but a secret teacher, a code written into the very structure of reality? Look around you. Every transformation in nature is born through struggle. The seed must crack before it becomes a tree. The caterpillar dissolves into formlessness before it emerges as a butterfly. And perhaps the human soul too must shatter its illusions before it remembers what it truly is. In this video, we will explore the real reason for human suffering, not from the surface level of psychology or social theory, but through the eyes of the mystics, philosophers, and enlightened ones who dare to look beyond appearances. We will uncover why suffering exists, what it tries to reveal, and how ancient teachings saw it as a necessary fire that purifies consciousness. You'll learn why humanity continues to repeat cycles of pain, why pleasure and suffering are two sides of the same mirror, and how one can transcend this endless duality, not by escaping life, but by awakening within it. Stay until the end, because what you are about to discover may change the way you see every hardship, every disappointment, and every tear that ever fell from your eyes. Suffering is not your enemy. It is your initiation. To understand the roots of human suffering, we must step back, far beyond modern psychology, beyond religion, and into the ancient world where wisdom was not learned, but remembered. Across civilizations, the greatest teachers agreed on one mysterious truth: suffering is not a curse, it is a mirror. Yet each tradition held its own key to deciphering what that mirror reflects. In ancient India, the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, beginning with the recognition that life is suffering, not as a pessimistic statement, but as a revelation. He said, "Walla, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering." But his true insight lay in understanding the cause, tanha, or craving. Humanity suffers because it clings to impermanent things and calls them eternal. It desires permanence in a world that breathes impermanence. Meanwhile, in the West, the Stoic philosophers echoed this same wisdom. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harm." For the Stoics, suffering was not what happens to us, but how we interpret what happens. The pain is real, but the torment is optional. The key lay in mastering perception, an art long forgotten in our age of endless reaction. In the mystic traditions of the Middle East, such as Sufism, suffering was seen as divine intoxication, the burning of the self that reveals the beloved. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." To the Sufis, suffering is a secret doorway, the destruction of ego's walls, so that divine love can pour through. The Christian mystics carried the same torch. Meister Eckhart taught that the soul must go through the fire to find its purest gold. For him, pain purified the soul of attachment, illusion, and pride, not as punishment, but as purification. And in the esoteric schools of Egypt and Greece, suffering was not emotional, it was initiatory. To pass through the mysteries, one had to die before dying. Symbolically, the initiate descended into the underworld, not to perish, but to be reborn. The pain of losing one's old self was the necessary threshold between ignorance and wisdom. Every culture, every sacred text, every hidden temple pointed to this paradox. That suffering, in its deepest sense, is the pressure of evolution, the soul's resistance to growth. It is the friction between what we are and what we are meant to become. Yet, as humanity grew more comfortable, more distracted, this understanding was lost. We began to see suffering as something to be eliminated, rather than understood. We anesthetized pain with pleasures, distractions, and endless pursuits, never realizing that we were silencing our greatest teacher? To the ancients, suffering was sacred. It was the crucible where consciousness transforms base metal into gold. And now, as we stand in the modern world, surrounded by abundance but starved for meaning, we must ask, could the suffering we run from be the very force trying to awaken us? Because if suffering is indeed the hand of the divine shaping the soul, then perhaps the question is not why do we suffer, but rather, why do we resist what suffering is trying to teach us? Imagine a sculptor chiseling away at a block of stone. Each strike of the hammer seems violent, merciless. Yet, beneath every blow, a hidden form begins to emerge, a shape that was always there, waiting to be revealed. This is the nature of human suffering. It is the chisel in the hand of existence, carving away everything that is false, everything that is not truly you. But to understand this mystery, we must look at suffering not as an event, but as a process of awakening. 1. The forgotten contract of the soul. Before birth, the mystics say, the soul makes an agreement to enter the realm of time and illusion, to forget its divine origin, and to rediscover it through experience. Why would a soul choose to suffer? Because without contrast, there is no consciousness. Light only knows itself by meeting darkness. Joy only gains meaning through the memory of sorrow. Freedom can only be understood by one who has known bondage. Thus, the human experience is a divine paradox. The soul descends into limitation, not as punishment, but as practice. It plays the game of forgetting so that awakening becomes meaningful. This descent into duality creates what we call the human condition, a delicate balance between spirit and matter, eternal and temporary, infinite and finite. And suffering arises precisely in the tension between these two worlds. When the soul identifies with the body, the mind, and the stories it inhabits, it forgets its infinite nature. It believes it is small, separate, fragile. Suffering begins the moment you believe you are what you are not. 2. The roots of pain, resistance to reality. All suffering, physical, emotional, or spiritual, arises from one simple mechanism: resistance. When reality differs from what the mind desires, tension is born. The mind says, "This shouldn't be happening." Life says, "But it is." And between those two voices, a storm begins. This resistance is the real source of suffering, not the pain itself. Pain is a messenger, a neutral signal of change or imbalance. But resistance is the refusal to listen to that signal. It's like holding your hand in fire and blaming the flame, rather than withdrawing. Ancient teachings called this ignorance, or not stupidity, but forgetfulness. Forgetfulness of the natural laws that govern existence. When we cling to what is impermanent, we suffer. When we fight what must change, we suffer. When we identify with thoughts and emotions instead of awareness itself, we suffer. The Buddha called this grasping. Modern psychology calls it attachment. But both point to the same truth. The human mind cannot tolerate impermanence, and yet the entire universe is impermanent. Every moment is born and dies in an instant. Even the stars themselves burn out. So how can one hope to cling to anything in a universe built on constant change? 3. The ego in its kingdom of fear. The ego, that fragile identity made of memories, labels, and roles, thrives on resistance. Its survival depends on maintaining separation. It says, "I am this and not that. I am right and they are wrong. I am good and I must avoid bad." The ego's entire game is division. It separates the self from the whole, and from that illusion of division, fear is born. Fear of loss, fear of death, fear of not being enough. This fear is the architect of suffering. It builds entire worlds of anxiety, comparison, and craving, always reaching for something just out of grasp. But here's the deeper paradox. The ego is not evil. It is simply immature. It was designed as a tool for survival, not for truth. In the material world, it helps the soul navigate matter. But when the ego takes control, it mistakes survival for purpose. It forgets that it is the servant, not the master. Every spiritual tradition, from Taoism to Hermeticism, has said the same thing. The fall of man is not moral, it is perceptual. We fell not from heaven, but from awareness. The Garden of Eden story, stripped of religious language, describes exactly this. The forbidden fruit was the fruit of duality, the knowledge of good and evil, the birth of comparison. Once humanity began to label, judge, and divide, innocence was lost, and suffering began. 4. The hidden gift of suffering. But what if suffering is not a mistake in the divine design? What if it is the design? Think of suffering as the heat that purifies metal, the storm that clears the air, the pressure that forms the diamond. Without resistance, nothing evolves. Without friction, consciousness remains dormant. In alchemical terms, suffering is the nigredo, the blackening, the first stage of transformation. The soul must be broken down, its impurities revealed, before it can transmute into gold. Each heartbreak, loss, or humiliation is a sacred furnace. It burns away illusion, identity, and false desire, until only truth remains. The Sufis described it as the annihilation of the self, fana. The mystic burns in longing for the divine until all separation dissolves. In that surrender, suffering becomes ecstasy. When one stops resisting pain and begins to observe it, a miracle occurs. Suffering transforms into awareness. 5. Awareness, the antidote to suffering. You cannot escape suffering through control. You can only transcend it through understanding. The mind says, I must fix this. Awareness says, let me witness this. The moment you turn awareness toward your pain, it begins to change shape. What was once an enemy becomes a teacher. You begin to see that suffering has always been the soul's alarm clock, waking you from the dream of separation. This is why every great teacher insisted, know thyself. Because self-knowledge is the end of unconscious suffering. When you see the mechanism clearly, the craving, the resistance, the identification, suffering loses its power. You still feel pain, but the pain no longer owns you. You can let it pass through, like clouds across the sky. So the first half of this truth is this. Suffering is not against you. It is you calling you home. When you understand that every discomfort is the universe trying to restore your alignment, you stop fighting the process. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to teach me? That is the beginning of wisdom. And in the next section, we will go even deeper into how suffering transforms consciousness, how the patterns of collective pain shape humanity's evolution, and how one can move from resistance to realization. Suffering, once seen clearly, reveals a secret architecture, a pattern woven into both the personal and cosmic levels of existence. It is not random, nor cruel. It is intelligent. It moves with purpose, and that purpose is evolution. If in the first part we saw that suffering arises from resistance, the friction between illusion and truth, now we must understand how that friction transforms consciousness, and why humanity continues to repeat the same painful patterns across time. 1. The wheel of repetition. Human life moves in cycles, much like the seasons. In Hindu philosophy, this is called samsara, the endless wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. But this cycle doesn't just describe physical reincarnation. It also reflects the repetition of emotional and mental suffering within a single lifetime. Have you noticed how pain repeats itself in patterns? The same kind of relationships, disappointments, or inner struggles reappear again and again, wearing different faces but whispering the same lesson. This is not coincidence. It is karma, not as divine punishment, but as divine education. Each cycle presents the same test until the consciousness learns to respond differently. Until the awareness grows, the lesson will keep knocking until it's heard. And the moment you understand the message hidden inside the suffering, the cycle dissolves, like a knot untied. Thus, the key is not to escape the wheel, but to wake up within it. 2. Collective suffering, humanity's shared dream. On a grander scale, the same process happens collectively. The wars, oppression, and injustices of history are humanity's shared karma, a mirror of our collective consciousness. When greed, ignorance, and fear dominate, civilizations crumble, just as individuals do when they ignore the inner voice of wisdom. The external world merely projects the inner state of the species. This is why the mystics have always said, the world is not broken, it is unconscious. The chaos we see is the world's own awakening process. Humanity, like an individual soul, must confront its shadow. The pain of our age, environmental destruction, loneliness, moral decay was not random. It is the dark night of the collective soul. Just as the individual must pass through personal darkness to awaken, humanity must pass through collective crisis to remember who it truly is. And yet, most of us fear this transformation. We call it collapse, but the mystic calls it initiation. 3. The alchemy of suffering. In the secret language of alchemy, suffering is the fire that transforms base metal into gold. But what exactly is being burned? It is not your body, nor your circumstances. It is the false self. Every time life confronts you with pain, something in you resists. That resistance is your ego clinging to identity. I am this kind of person. This shouldn't happen to me. I can't live without that. And so, suffering applies pressure. It turns up the heat until one day, the mask cracks. You realize that what you truly are cannot be destroyed because it was never born. That realization, the awareness beyond form, is the gold that the alchemist seeks. To the uninitiated, suffering seems meaningless. To the initiate, it is sacred combustion, the death of illusion. This is why mystics like Saint John of the Cross spoke of the dark night of the soul. It is the stage when the divine withdraws all outer comforts, forcing the soul to seek within. The pain of abandonment is the initiation into unity. And once the gold appears, once awareness awakens, the same suffering that once burned you becomes your teacher. You begin to bless the very fire you once cursed. 4. The two paths of suffering. There are two ways human beings experience suffering: the path of unconsciousness and the path of awakening. On the first path, suffering leads to bitterness, fear, and despair. The person resists, clings, and blames. They repeat the same wounds endlessly. Their pain becomes identity. On the second path, suffering becomes the doorway. The person observes, learns, and surrenders. They see pain as a message rather than an enemy. Their suffering refines them into wisdom. The difference between these two paths is awareness. Awareness turns pain into purification. Unawareness turns pain into poison. Every human being must choose, again and again, which path to walk. Even the enlightened ones were not free from pain. They simply ceased to suffer through resistance. They allowed life to move through them without distortion. 5. The paradox of pleasure and pain. To understand the full nature of suffering, one must also understand its twin, pleasure. Human beings chase pleasure as the escape from pain, not realizing that both are part of the same movement. Pleasure and pain are not opposites. They are pendulums swinging around the same axis. Desire. The moment you crave pleasure, you create its shadow. Every high carries the seed of its fall. Every attachment to joy creates fear of loss. The wise see this dance and step out of it. They do not reject pleasure, but they do not depend on it. They enjoy it as a passing fragrance, knowing it too shall fade. The secret is equanimity, the ability to remain centered as life moves through both sunlight and storm. This state of inner stillness, described in the Bhagavad Gita as sthita prajna, is not cold detachment but radiant peace. It is the realization that the self is not the wave, but the ocean beneath it. 6. Suffering as the bridge to compassion. There is one more hidden gift in suffering. It awakens compassion. When you have suffered deeply, you begin to understand others in ways you never could before. You no longer judge pain. You recognize it. You see your own reflection in every wounded heart. This is why the most compassionate beings and the saints, healers, and teachers often carry the deepest scars. Their suffering broke them open to the pain of all beings. In Buddhism, this is the birth of the Bodhisattva, the being who, after awakening, chooses to remain in the world of suffering to help others awaken too. Suffering, then, is not only the fire that awakens you, it is the bridge that connects you to all life. It dissolves the illusion of separateness and reveals the truth. There is only one consciousness, playing infinite roles. 7. The Great Shift. When awareness expands enough to see this cosmic game, to see that life, death, joy, and sorrow are but movements within the infinite, something miraculous happens. Suffering ceases to be suffering. The body may feel pain, the mind may witness loss, but the soul remains untouched, silent, luminous, vast. You begin to experience suffering not as tragedy, but as transformation in motion. This is the real purpose of pain, to push consciousness beyond identification, to teach us to live from that unshakable center where all opposites dissolve. And in that stillness, you see, nothing was ever against you. Every moment of suffering was grace in disguise, a whisper from eternity, calling you home. When humanity learns to see suffering this way, the world will change. Because as long as we run from pain, we remain enslaved. But the moment we understand it, truly see it, the chains fall away. And the soul remembers. It was never broken. It was only sleeping. It is one thing to understand suffering as a philosophical truth, and another to live that truth when life strikes you with loss, failure, or heartbreak. Because when pain knocks on the door, theory crumbles. What you need then is not ideas, but practice. The ancient masters knew this. That is why they did not simply teach about suffering. They offered methods to transmute it into wisdom. What follows are timeless techniques drawn from the mystery schools, the monasteries, and the modern mind alike for turning suffering into awakening. 1. The first step, stop running. The greatest mistake most people make is to run from pain. We distract ourselves with noise, work, pleasure, or spirituality itself, anything to avoid feeling. But what you run from follows you. The first key, then, is radical stillness. When suffering arises, pause. Do not rush to fix, explain, or escape it. Simply stop. Sit in silence. Let the storm rage. And instead of saying, "I am suffering," say, "There is suffering." This tiny shift changes everything. You move from identification to observation. You become the sky, not the weather. Every mystic begins here, in the sacred pause between reaction and awareness. Because when you stop resisting, the energy of pain begins to reveal its message. 2. The practice of presence, Eckhart Tolle once said, the primary cause of unhappiness is never the situation, but your thoughts about it. When you observe your suffering without judgment, you begin to see the machinery behind it, the inner dialogue, the mental narrative, the why me story that fuels the flame. The practice is simple, but not easy. Bring your attention into the body. Feel the raw sensation of the pain, the tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the gut, the trembling in the hands. Do not label it as bad. Do not interpret it. Just feel. This is called presence through sensation. It is how the mind begins to dissolve and awareness takes over. If you stay fully present with the energy of pain, not thinking about it, but being with it, you will feel something miraculous happen. The energy moves. It changes form. It was never static. You were simply frozen around it. This is the secret. Suffering does not ask to be solved. It asks to be felt. 3. The inner alchemy of observation and alchemy. The transformation happens not through force, but through heat and patience. Likewise, when you observe your suffering with loving awareness, you apply the two elements that transmute darkness, conscious heat and still attention. Here is a simple method used by mystics and psychologists alike. Step 1. Name what you feel, not as identity, but as observation. Fear is here. Anger is here. Grief is here. Step 2. Feel where it lives in your body. Bring your full awareness to that spot. Step 3. Breathe into it. Don't try to change it. Just stay with it like a compassionate witness. Step 4. Ask gently, what are you trying to teach me? And then listen. The key is sincerity. If you stay with it long enough, the pain often reveals something deeper, a belief, a memory, a forgotten truth. And when that insight comes, the energy releases on its own. You have turned lead into gold. 4. The reversal of attention. Most suffering feeds on attention directed outward. They hurt me. This shouldn't have happened. That was unfair. To dissolve suffering, you must reverse the direction of your gaze from outer reaction to inner recognition. Ask yourself, who is the I that is suffering? What part of me is wounded by this event? Is this pain touching my body or my identity? When you trace suffering back to its root, you discover it always stems from identification with an image, a story, or a role. When you release that identification, the suffering begins to fade like smoke in the wind. You discover the witness, the eternal awareness that remains untouched no matter what happens. This is not denial. It is transcendence through truth. 5. The transformation through meaning. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps of World War II, wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." Meaning transforms suffering into service. When you reframe your pain as part of your soul's education, it loses its cruelty. It becomes sacred instruction. Ask yourself, what might this experience be trying to teach me about myself? How might this pain help me grow in compassion, strength, or wisdom? How could I use what I have learned to help others who suffer like me? Every wound can become a ministry. Every scar can become scripture. The mystic does not ask for an easy life. They ask for a meaningful one. 6. Meditation on impermanence. Another powerful practice is the meditation on anicca, impermanence. Everything you cling to will one day dissolve. Your body, possessions, relationships, and memories. This is not morbid, it is liberation. When you contemplate impermanence, suffering softens. You stop demanding eternity from what is temporary. Try this. Close your eyes and imagine your breath as the rise and fall of existence. With every inhale, life enters. With every exhale, it fades. Say silently, "This too shall pass." Every wave rises and falls back into the ocean. So does every moment. To accept this is to rest in peace while still alive. 7. Service as transmutation. The final step in the alchemy of suffering is service. Once you have touched your own pain with awareness, you are no longer afraid of others' pain. You begin to feel the suffering of the world, not as despair, but as a call to compassion. Serve not to escape your suffering, but to redeem it. When you help another, your own pain becomes fuel for empathy. The Buddha did not eradicate suffering. He transcended it and then dedicated his life to easing it in others. That is the natural flowering of awakening. Love. Because love is what suffering was trying to reveal all along. 8. Daily practices to transmute suffering. Here are 3 simple daily disciplines that anchor this transformation. 1. The morning witness. Upon waking, before looking at your phone or thinking of the day, sit for 2 minutes in stillness. Observe your thoughts rise like clouds. Remind yourself, I am awareness, not the thought. 2. The breath of acceptance. Whenever you feel discomfort, breathe in deeply while saying inwardly, yes, this too. Breathe out saying, let it pass. Repeat until peace returns. 3. The nightly offering. Before sleep, review your day. For every painful moment, say, thank you for the lesson I could not yet see. This rewires the subconscious to see pain as instruction rather than punishment. 9. The fruit of the practice. If you practice these disciplines with sincerity, something begins to shift. You notice that suffering still appears, but it no longer defines you. You become porous to life, allowing joy and pain alike to flow through without leaving scars. You stop fearing change because you no longer depend on permanence. You stop fearing loss because you no longer depend on possession. And you stop fearing death because you have already tasted eternity in the stillness of awareness. The same fire that once burned you now warms you. You see that suffering was never meant to destroy, only to awaken. Suffering, then, is not an obstacle to enlightenment. It is the very path. The soul grows not in the gardens of pleasure, but in the deserts of trial. For in the silence after every heartbreak, there lies a doorway that leads back to what you have always been, infinite, whole, and free. There is a moment in every soul's journey when the storm finally quiets. Not because life has become easier, but because something inside has changed, profoundly, permanently. You no longer look at pain and ask, why me? You look at pain and whisper, thank you. Because now you understand, suffering was never a curse. It was the teacher you refused to recognize. It was the voice of the divine speaking in the only language strong enough to reach you. The hidden meaning revealed. The real reason for human suffering is this. It is the friction of awakening. The universe uses discomfort to move consciousness from one level to the next. Each sorrow, each disappointment is a sacred tension point, the soul pressing against the shell of its current understanding. Suffering is not the opposite of joy, it is the seed of it. Without winter, there is no spring. Without the death of illusion, there is no birth of truth. When you see life through the eyes of awareness, even your darkest nights shimmer with purpose. You realize that the pain that once seemed unbearable was not there to destroy you, but to reveal who you truly are, something vast, silent, and unbreakable. The end of resistance. The path of awakening is not about eliminating suffering. It is about ending the resistance that turns pain into suffering. Pain is inevitable. Bodies age, hearts break, worlds change. But suffering, the mental resistance, the story of this should not be, is optional. And the moment you stop fighting what is, something miraculous happens. You begin to feel peace, not because life is perfect, but because you are aligned with life as it is. That alignment is liberation. That surrender is strength. That acceptance is freedom. It is the realization that even in the heart of chaos, you are untouched, the silent witness, the eternal awareness beneath all change. From suffering to service. Those who awaken from suffering often become healers, teachers, or silent lights to others. Because true understanding naturally gives birth to compassion. When you see through your own pain, you begin to see through everyone's. You recognize the shared wound of humanity, the forgetfulness of our divine nature. And your heart no longer wants to escape the world. It wants to serve it. This is why the awakened ones, from the Buddha to the Christ, did not retreat permanently into the mountains. They came back down to help others cross the river. The fire that once burned them became the light that guided others. So it will be for you, too, if you allow it. The invitation. If you are suffering right now, if life feels heavy, confusing, or cruel, pause. Breathe. Know that what you feel is not a punishment. It is a passage. You are being refined, not rejected. You are being invited to awaken. Ask your pain, what are you trying to show me? Then listen, not with your mind, but with your heart. If you can sit with that question long enough, without turning away, you will find something extraordinary waiting beneath the ache, a quiet presence, spacious and luminous. That presence is you. Not the you that struggles or succeeds, but the eternal awareness that has been watching all along. The final realization. In the end, suffering is not something to be conquered, it is something to be understood. And in that understanding, it dissolves. Like mist in the morning sun, it fades, revealing what was always there. Peace. When you stop resisting life, life stops resisting you. You move in harmony with the great rhythm of existence, laughing and weeping, losing and finding, dying and being reborn, knowing all of it is sacred. You see that the sculptor's hammer was never cruel. It was the hand of love, chiseling away the false to reveal the divine form within. So the next time suffering visits you, do not flee. Invite it in as an old friend, for it comes bearing truth. And when it has done its work, when the lesson is learned and the heart is open, it will leave quietly, as all teachers do, bowing to the awakened soul it helped to set free. The wound was never your punishment. It was your doorway.